I'd like to bring you into the conversation now, and I'd like to do it in the form. I would find a way. I would find a way to say what you want to say in answer to a politician's trick. You know. I'll call on you. Please try to keep your question to 30 seconds or thereabouts. Really a question. You can make an opening comment premise, but we don't want you arguing as well because we have 4 very good debaters here. Hold the microphone this close to you. And where's the center microphone? Gentleman right on the center aisle here, please.
Hi. I've heard Nick's argument, and I think without getting into more of the round circle, from my perspective, don't see where the Iranians would give a lot of credibility to these threats of sanctions or war or anything else. So I would like to hear the panel kind of debate and address, what do you think make the arguments for what the Iranians have to gain by giving up this nuclear weapons, and what they have to lose. Ken started to touch on it, but it hasn't really been explored. And I would get into that to decide whether diplomacy can go anywhere.
Ken, put yourself in the position of the Iranian government in a negotiation with the U.S. What do they want?
Sure. Look, I think the truth is that the Iranians don't want to be in these negotiations because they're very happy with the status quo. That's the regime, okay? And that's exactly the point that Dan and Liz have made. They're absolutely right. We're dealing with an Iran that is at least bifurcated. What the people want, what the regime want, are often 2 different things. And that's ultimately the goal of the diplomatic process, is to put the regime on the horns of a dilemma, to say to them, you can have what you want or what your people want, but not both, and you're going to have to choose. And what we've seen with this regime is, while they are autocratic, while they control absolute power in Iran, they are very sensitive to public opinion. They don't like to be put in the position where it is clear that what they are doing is the exact opposite of what their people want. And what their people want is a thriving economy. Their economy is in desperate straits at the moment. It is going down the toilet. Comprehensive international sanctions could push it over the edge, and the regime is extremely fearful of that. On the other hand, what we can offer them if they do the right thing, and that's what we threaten them with if they do the wrong thing, if they do the right thing, what we can offer them with is the economic support that they so desperately need. The lifting of not just the international sanctions, but of our own unilateral sanctions, the provision of trade credits, investment guarantees, and everything else. We say to the Iranians, you have 2 paths. You can choose the path of darkness, you keep your nuclear program and your support for terrorism and everything else, and we will cripple your economy. And that is something that your people will not abide. Or you can do it the other way, and we will make your economy thrive.
I would just argue that it is true the economy is in desperate shape. 25-30% inflation right now, 25-30% unemployment, oil trading today about $60 a barrel. They are in a much weaker, less than half than what it was a year ago. They are in a much weaker economic situation. But if what Ken is stating, that the Iranian government, which is complicated and opaque and difficult for all the reasons Nick said for us to truly understand, but if you believe the Iranian government is effectively going to make a rational decision and they can be won over with inducements, which is what he's saying, what package of inducements could we ever offer them, ever, that would be better than the situation they would get from having a nuclear bomb? I mean, think about this. A nuclear bomb would be able to guarantee that the U.S. would never threaten them again. We would, if Iran tomorrow decided that they want to go into Bahrain, which they consider one of the original Iranian Persian provinces, if they wanted to go slowly take over Saudi oil fields, which would certainly help their economic situation, we would have virtually no leverage. We would pose no threat to them. And as they try to further establish their own hegemony, as I said earlier, in the region, having a nuclear bomb would allow them to cement that. What inducements do we have to offer them that would be better than all that a nuclear bomb would give them?
I thought that was a rhetorical question, but Ken, you...
Come on. Dan, do you really believe that even after the Iranians have nuclear weapons, we're going to let them take over the Saudi oil fields? We did a pretty good job of keeping the Russians out of Germany. I think we can keep the Iranians on the other side of the Persian Gulf.
I think trying to, this is a classic fallback position, trying to compare the Iranian regime to other governments and other
They're much weaker. That's my point.
Yeah, potentially. And there's also potentially an internal divide and fissures within the regime that's divided between those who are motivated by national interests and those that are radical theocrats, as President Obama has described them. that aren't terribly rational and trying to figure out and game them out and hope that we can win over and resolve those fissures in the short period of time before they actually have a nuclear bomb, to me, is a pretty big gamble.
And your partner, Liz Cheney?
I think it's terrific to sort of sit here and say here's the ideal set of circumstances. We got to have these tough sanctions. And Liz and Dan, how are you going to get those tough sanctions without doing diplomacy? And I would say the history of the relationship shows we aren't going to get tough sanctions with diplomacy, the current diplomacy that we've got. At the end of the day, the argument Dan's making is absolutely right, that there are not inducements at this point. There are not inducements that make the Iranians better off than having the bomb. What does cause the Iranians to alter their behavior, and what we have seen historically, is if they believe that there is a credible threat of military force, if they don't alter their behavior. This is also true of our European allies. And as you're talking about this diplomacy, I think we need to think about the motives of all of the people, all the partners involved here. The Europeans, as we've seen throughout, they like their commercial relationships with Iran, and they don't like the notion that the United States is going to use military force against Iran. If they believe the threat of military force is on the table, that's frankly the only thing I've seen that convinces them they better get serious about sanctions. We have not seen them serious about sanctions, and I think the idea that we're going to call this current diplomacy strong or tough diplomacy, it simply doesn't bear out if you look at the facts. This is diplomacy with no teeth. This is an open hand, direct and unconditional.
Question from the second row.